So today's scripture is from the book of Philippians, chapter 4, verses 11 through 13. This is the letter that Paul wrote from prison to his friends at Philippi. I don't say this because I am in need, for whatever the situation I find myself in, I have learned to be self-sufficient. I know what it is to be brought low, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret, whether on a full stomach or an empty one. In poverty or plenty, I can do all things through the one who gives me strength. Ancient words for today's understanding.
Well, thank you for setting aside time this morning, and we remember people that are traveling with their families and things, so appreciate having y'all here. We're on a series on how to find peace of mind in these traumatic times. It's really hard right now if you're sane. You know, once you go insane, then it's a lot easier. But the other morning woke up and I kind of scanned the headlines and start my day. Pretty good. And one of the first ones I ran across was calling Bernie Sanders anti-Semitic for questioning some things that Israel does. And then within a few columns, I found another article saying he was Islamophobic because he was concerned about what happened to the Israeli families in the Hamas attack. And it's just one of those times where there's so much pain and so much trauma that people aren't acting very well in this nation that was already divided. When you're traumatized, the one thing you care about is which side are you on, right? Because you're trying to survive, and we've got these wounds right below the surface. It's understandable. Are you my friend or are you my enemy? Problem is when you have two friends that are traumatized. And this happens like in relationships a lot, where one person's pain cancels out the other person's pain. And it becomes almost impossible to be friends with both of the people. So I think one of the things that we forget about sometimes is the importance of peace of mind in this whole process. I want to give my life as fully as I can to activism. I want to work for social justice, but that has to come from compassion. If it does not come from compassion, it becomes a part of the storm. Last week I was telling you about the peace rally that I went to at the Capitol, where by the time I got there, the other two organizers had been in a fist fight and were arrested, so we couldn't have the peace rally. And just to realize how hard it is, as human beings, how hard it is not to become overcome by the pain and just try to just jump right in the storm with both feet. You can't see it from the outside because sometimes it looks the same. You have to confront injustice. But if it does not come from compassion, if you're not motivated by compassion for the human beings that are caught in that vortex, then without meaning to, you and I can make things worse. I mean, ultimately, there won't be peace in Israel without justice in Gaza, and there won't be justice in Gaza without peace in Israel. Human beings are interconnected, and we've got to the point where any war is an unjust war, because they're all urban wars now. In modern warfare, there are more civilians that die than combatants. So it's like we've outlived the nation state, and we don't want to hear that. We've outlived the idea that religion can become a political stance. It's funny how many people God has given the world to, right? In Jerusalem alone, it's like I know 3 religions that all think that God has chosen them to have that one little spot. So all of us are going to have to do better. And to find a deeper, larger place inside our hearts is a wonderful gift to the world. Paul is in prison, as you just heard, but he's on his way to be executed by Rome. Now that tells me that he did some activism, because Rome didn't care what your religion was. Right? Rome didn't. You could believe anything, but what you could not do is question empire. You could not tell enslaved people that they had the same rights as other people. So for all the things we think about Paul, he must have felt like trouble to the Roman Empire, or they wouldn't have killed him. And he wrote a little poem, a little ode to joy on his way to be executed. Philippians. He's grown up. This is grown up Paul. This is not the Paul that so critical and micromanaging everybody's life. He's learned through his life that there are more important things than the things we fight over. So in our passage today, and I didn't divide it very well, if I went back, because whenever the sentence starts, halfway, when I talk about this, the preacher didn't divide it very well. So what he's trying to do is say that he's found a way to be peaceful no matter what happens to him externally. And I think even if you don't want to, if you don't care about Paul, to have that art within yourself, in your own way. I learned this in a very strange way. A long time ago, I had a house, and I had 2 huskies, and we had a storm blowing into Austin. I just started working here, and so there's this storm coming in. There's no rain yet. There's thunder, and there's enormous wind. The trees are swirling around, and the huskies are just howling. They're running around in fear, crazy fear. And I'm trying to chase them to bring them in the house, and I can't catch them. So I'm getting frustrated, and all of a sudden, in all that fury and the wind and the thunder and all this kind of stuff, I hear the wind chime, feverishly making music out of the same storm. You understand the insight? Here I am running around like a chicken with its head cut off, and the little wind chime is turning all of that into music. And I was at least sane enough to say, I need to learn from this. My frantic loss of control was not helping anything or anybody. As much as we think we care more when we lose balance, if we really want to help, we'll do it from a place of peace and compassion. It may not look like that to someone else, but I think from the inside out, we know the difference that is there. So one of the things that Paul says in this section is that he's learned to be, the word is a Stoic word, and it means to control oneself, to be in charge of oneself. Paul loved the Stoics. And one of the reasons I don't think most traditional Christians understand Paul, I'd say most, is they have not studied the Stoics. You don't realize the words that he's using have special meaning. The love passage, we one time did a sermon series just on one word at a time to go through there, because these things are very rich, but they have a special meaning. And this is, in the Stoic culture, they realize that what we say to ourselves is like the steering wheel. And as Americans, we don't usually even know that steering wheel is there. Right? We tune our cars, we clean our houses, we get the pesticides and all this kind of stuff, but we let what we say to ourselves go by unattended. If anybody talked to you the way you sometimes talk to yourself? Right? I mean, if somebody could put a helmet on you and project on the wall what you're saying about yourself sometimes, I mean, nobody would put that helmet on. But think about how healing it would be to take control of what you're saying to yourself. Because you're talking to yourself. This isn't like just happening to you. It's like we have this inner conversation that's going on. And it's sometimes brutal. It's sometimes just dumb. We upset ourselves worse than what's happening to us sometimes. And I'm really good at being passive aggressive. I can turn little things into these big melodramas with operatic moments. He says he's learned the secret of being content no matter what's happening to him. That word secret looks like it's coming from mystery religions to me. They used to initiate people. They'd go through training. I think Christianity was once a mystery religion. When you see the stuff about the caves and the torches, that's all coming from the mystery religions. And the point of the mystery religions was not to make you a good Christian or a good Jewish person or a good Greek citizen, but to make you a good human being, a good member of the web of life. It takes training to be gentle. It takes training to be wise. So that's, I think, the culture that Paul is referring to here. That we can take the steering wheel and watch what we say to ourselves. There's also a story in Buddhism where they have the same temptation story, but it's a lot clearer in Buddhism. Buddhism, that story probably came first, that the story of Jesus' temptation is probably borrowed, to be nice, from the Buddhist. But in the Buddhist thing, you understand it better. The first temptation is lust. The tempter brings these beautiful daughters. But Buddha is making the transfer from being an ego to being the great self. That's sort of what this mystery religion is about. It's like starting with your ego and just transforming it. When Jesus says the I am sayings, I think that's coming from that culture. He's not talking about himself. He's talking about your larger life. He's speaking from your own heart to kind of nurture this growth in who you really are. In the temptation, another temptation was fear. So Buddha's sitting there in the tree, and he's doing this transformation from ego to great self. In Hindu literature and Buddhist literature, you see self with a capital, that's the great self. And the tempter is shooting arrows at him. But instead of running away, his compassion is so great at that point that the arrows become flowers as you get closer to him. We have the capacity to transform suffering into beauty. Not always. Sometimes it's too great and we can't do it. When we're traumatized, it's not the time to try to do that. But think of your life heroes and sheroes who transformed their own personal suffering into songs, or into drama, or into wisdom, or into social justice. That instead of turning the pain into something brittle and wounding somebody else with it, they transformed it. I have a wonderful 12-string, but I don't play it too much because I hate to tune it so bad. First of all, the strings are very narrow, so they'll break and they'll hit you in the face. But the main thing is, unless it's perfectly tuned, it's going to sound terrible no matter what you do. Right? You can play, exquisite with your fingers, but if it's out of tune, it's not going to matter. The same thing is true with our heart. You're not being selfish when you rest and heal. Right? When you know you're off balance, you're not being irresponsible to step back. Because rushing into the storm is not probably going to make anything better. The reward in that is peace of mind. And to want to do that, we have to realize that there's nothing that life has to offer you from the outside in that feels as wonderful as when your heart is tuned. We don't lose peace of mind, we trade it for something else. There's nothing that life has to give you that's going to feel as wonderful as when your heart is tuned from the inside. So that's, I think, the first thing, to take that. Paul's learned that how he thinks about things is going to ultimately shape how he's going to feel about things. And then second, he's learned to let go of the things that are out of his control. Now, this is a lot harder than it seems because it feels like apathy, and that's what you don't want. But in counseling, they train you. It's one thing to feel and understand what somebody else is feeling, but it's something else to fall into the same worldview. If you come to me for counseling, which you're too smart probably to do that, but if you did, and I got depressed too, that wouldn't help you at all, right? So the loving counselor is with you and is resonating with you, but they're not falling into the same traps. It's the same with activism. That in order to extend this love out into the world, you have to understand what's in your control and what isn't in your control. I also learned this from a dog. I have to start low with the bar, but I was very, very young, and we had a Cocker Spaniel named Jerry, and there was a lizard in the backyard running around, and Jerry was trying to catch the lizard, which I was already didn't want anything to hurt, so I'm chasing, trying to protect the lizard, which I'm not able to. I'm not very fast, obviously. So in horror, I see Jerry take up the lizard by the tail, and then suddenly, guess what happened? The tail came off. The lizard was able to release the tail and run away. So the tail is kind of sitting there in the backyard like that, and the dog watching it, and me going, this is important. I mean, I was a little kid, but it's like, that lizard is alive because it could let go of that beautiful tail. That's not easy to do. When we identify with externals, when we identify with things we don't really control, and that's human nature, then we attach ourselves to unnecessary pain and suffering. So, rushing into a storm where you don't have leverage to help is not as helpful as it may seem. To keep your balance does not mean that you don't care. It means you're not going to let yourself get triggered. You're not going to let yourself fall in defensiveness and reactivity, because your balance is always important, when not only for justice, which is worth doing it for that, but also just for your happiness. There's lots of things we have to let go of. Then the third and final part for today that I get out of this passage is when he talks about he can do all things through the one that strengthens him. Now, if Jesus is the only way, you can count me out. But I'm not interested in a religion where I'm better than everybody else because I'm following the one true Savior. That does not sound like Jesus to me. I think when Jesus is talking about the one, he's talking about a deep place within us where we're connected to everything else and everyone else. He's talking about a radical universal love that's in there deep, but we can't always access it because we're caught at the surface of life where all the waves and storm are. If we can go deeper, there's peace. And there's also interconnectedness where we can discern what is the healing thing to do. We can discern what is the prophetic thing to do. But in order to do that, we have to accept the whole circle of life. Most of us are really good at accepting birth and life. But the letting go part isn't easy for any of us, probably. You were like a wave in the ocean. Your death is as important and creative as your life. You are an interim form becoming something else. Right? You live in an evolving environment. So you are becoming something else. To say no to the life process yokes you to pain and to suffering. That's why I quote so often from The Circle of Life, the Lion King. I just think it's like a very mystical kind of cartoon. From the day we arrive on the planet and blinking step into the sun, there's more to see than can ever be seen, more to do than can ever be done. There's far too much to take in here, more to find than can ever be found. But the sun rolling high through the sapphire sky keeps great and small on the endless round. It's the circle of life, and it moves us all through despair and hope, through faith and love, till we find our place on the path unwinding in the circle of life. When Jesus talks about the one, maybe he means that deeper unity that you have with all being. I think that's what he's saying. I don't think he's saying, I'm 2 inches taller than Muhammad. I can bench press more than Buddha. See, they're all talking about a deep place in us all. They're not enemies, they're friends. You cannot necessarily imagine what that large circle of life is, but you can tell when your horizon's getting smaller. Right? When you're getting tunnel vision, you can feel it. And that's when you need to step back and relax and notice the interwovenness of all life and all being. Because there is no peace of mind if we're at war with the circle of life. So we live in a very difficult time. And it's a great gift to come from your authentic depths and to reach out in compassion. We have to stand up for each other. We have to stand up for the people being oppressed and persecuted. No question about it. But it's so easy to fall into the storm and to think that life is a struggle between good and bad people. If life ever looks like that to you, you need a vacation. All the people in one country are not bad, and all the people in the other country are not good. There are people that are caught in a struggle, and sometimes both sides are traumatized, and both sides have good people and some bad people wrapped in there doing mischief. To stay outside the storm and call people to their own steering wheel. To stay outside the storm and demonstrate to people what it's like not to be triggered, but to work for justice and love in balance. To demonstrate to people what it's like to live in the whole circle of life. And while you're struggling for justice, you're not really on one person's side against the other person. It's deeper than that. You're for universal human rights. And when people are getting those rights denied, you're struggling for them, but not because you hate somebody else on the other side. This is the way Emerson said it. He always says things real pretty. He says, the wise who are in a storm pray not for safety from danger, but for deliverance from fear. It is the storm within which endangers us, not the storm without. It's a lesson I personally learned from a wind chime in the backyard. That if we don't let ourselves be defined by the turmoil and chaos around us, if we come from a place of attuned heart, we can bring wisdom, beauty, and justice. We can turn that pain and trauma into something beautiful if we'll tune our hearts to the whole circle of life. Well, this is what I get from this passage from Paul. We'll take a moment for you to think about how you would have preached it.